Okay, this is very inconvenient. The previous recording didn't have the sound. Is interesting that only now a student noticed that. But anyhow, this is the link to the video. And again, what I'd like for you to do is watch the video, then play the PowerPoint in animation mode, use the doc in class participation to answer some of the questions that the answers are in the PowerPoint. Apply these concepts in the homework. This is a typical example of an application. You have a three-tier architecture, the view, which is your browser in HTML. You have an application server that is usually the controller or the business logic, and you have the database server like maybe Microsoft SQL Server, Oracle, DBMS, and that's where the database, the tables will be stored in. So this is a typical MVC three-tier architecture. Customarily, these will be different machines. Now, what goes from the browser is a request, and this is an object-oriented. And what the browser gets back is a response. It's in HTML or XML, and the browser is going to consume that and display things on the now, I'm going to cover several internet concepts, the technologies used in the view controller, and of course the class is about the database, so we'll not cover that since we know how to design and implement a database using the SQL language. But I'll give you several examples. The presentation layer, which is the view, the HTML, the forms, how to use JavaScript, how to style that. We'll look at XML and how to style that. We'll look at technologies for middle tier. And again, I'm going to show you JSP pages where you have HTML with the Java behind the HTML. ASP pages, so that's Microsoft technology, where you have HTML, C# embedded in HTML, PHP, where you have again HTML and PHP5, which is object-oriented behind these pages, and how these layers communicate. What we usually want from the internet is a page, a song, an image. So to get access to it, we are using a HTTP protocol. I'll show you the other ones. This is the address where the, actually this will map to a physical address of the computer, and this is the resource that you are looking. Again, another example of URIs are email addresses. So again, that's the naming schema. This is the host name, and this is the resource you are looking for. Now, the HTTP, that stands for Hypertext Transfer Protocol, is the language that's consumed at the presentation layer. HTTP is one. You can have HTTPS if you want to send things securely. TCP, IP. So these are different technologies. So what happens when you click on this link? You'll actually get the resource. But let's look at under the hood what happens with request and response that you will get from the, you'll send to the web server and you'll get back from the web server. So this is the request, and typical a request looks like this. And this will be the reply, and typically the reply looks like this. So here's the client. It sends a request to the web server, and it says, I'm looking for this page. I'm using HTTP version 1.1. I am Mozilla 4.0. I accept back HTML text, images, GIF, and JPEG. Now, the web server will get this, and again, finally, maybe there's some dynamic data that will be obtained from the database. The response is looking like this. So the web server says I'm using HTTP 1.1. AOK is a status, so the date. We'll place the I'm Apache version 1.3.0 running on Linux. This is the last modified, and the content is 1024, and what follows will be HTML. So HTML, we'll look at the details. We'll have a begin tag, end tag, like this is the head, the body, begin, end. Inside the body, you have header 1, you can have header 3, bold. So we'll look at various HTML tags that are available for us. And this is the end of the HTML document. So again, there are two protocols. You can use GET or POST, and we'll look at maybe the differences. The client, this is the browser, and it tells what it accepts. And these are a more detailed explanation of what the response from the web server looks like. Good things about HTTP is stateless. So it's simple, but it actually does not remember anything from every time you send something from the browser to the web server doesn't remember anything. So with that said, if you have applications where you have to keep shopping carts, login information, you have to do that in the application. Is not possible using just the request and response. So there are some ways, like the cookies that reside on the client side, and some other technologies. Now let's look at the presentation layer. The technology is HTML, stands for Hypertext Markup Language. And I'll show you an example of HTML. Another language that the browser consumes is XML, Extendable Markup Languages, very similar to HTML. While HTML has predefined tags, you can actually create your own in XML. This is the definition or the type, and you can actually standardize. So if you look at this type variable, this type will actually allow you to verify that an XML is of this type, so you can create some preprocessors. This is the language to actually format XML, and I will look at so this is an example of an HTML. So here's the begin and HTML. And these are some sample commands or tags. So HTML, this is the example. Head, there's nothing in the head. Here's the body, begin, end. Some other commands are unordered list. So here's the begin, end. And inside you have the list, the entry. In this example, you have 3 of them. Again, begin, end tag for all of them. HTML is a markup language. The commands, you have a start tag, end tag. End tag has the same name, but you start with a slash, like in this example. There are many text editors that will actually create HTML. For example, the Save As in Word can actually give you that, but again, it's very ugly compared to you writing the HTML. This is an XML example. So again, you have elements. Elements can have attributes, like in this example, you have gender and format. And then you have the data in between the begin tag and end tag. So again, an element can be made of other elements. So in this example, I have book list, that's the end. Here is a book, here is another book, here's another book. Here is author, and that's the end of author. It contains another element, first name. Please note that the data is in between the begin and end. So if you count how many elements we have in this XML, so it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Indentation helps in figuring out how many elements you have. So here's the book list, the author, the first name, last name, the title, published, up to 7. XML is extendable markup language. So you can create your own language, and there are many out there. So we'll look at Now, XML and the relations that we actually study, the relational databases. Again, now most of the database vendors like Microsoft and Oracle have created a built-in type called XML. So it's very easy to take XML documents and create relation attributes or columns or fields and vice versa. So they embedded that in the relational databases. So again, XML is going to show you a description on what the data. This is a language, chemical markup language, and it has begin, end. Here is the data and some others, so you can actually create your own XML documents. XML was designed with the goals that they should be compatible with the previous, the HTML, and also it should be easy to write XML processors, and you can actually format them according to a DDT. This is another example of element. So begin and element. In the begin, you have 1, 2 attributes, and so we have one element here and 2 attributes. It looks like HTML, but these are not predefined tags. So begin, end, 2 attributes, and the data goes in between and the end. Very good. Again, XML is case and space sensitive. So there shouldn't be space between this and the sign, the equal and the close tag. And empty elements, you can write them like this. So you have the slash at the end, so there's no begin and end. These are the rules for the attributes. So this is the attribute and the value. There are 2 of them. They go inside the open, the begin tag. And again, no spaces, and multiple attributes are separated by white space. So again, it's, and here's where the data goes between the begin and the end element. So XML data is anything between opening and closing. You'll have a problem if you have greater than or less than. That will be a problem. These are example of XML comments, less than, greater than, exclamation mark, and the dash, dash, and what's in between are comments. We can nest XML documents. Again, indentation is a must. So XML documents have only one root element, and this is another one. And this is made of some text and another element. So you actually can create a tree out of these examples. So you can actually be able to store XML documents. So for this example, the root node is the root. Here is tag 1 that has some text, and the element, this one has the more. So that's what a DOM looks like for that XML document. If I want to actually verify that an XML is of certain type, like for example when I say index, I create a DTD, document time definition, and I can write a compiler that will see if the XML is satisfying this type. And I'll show you an example of DDT. So this is XML, this is a DDT. So it says I have an element basket that has 1 or more cherry and 0 or more apple or orange. Now, the cherry has an attribute flavor that is required. So cherry flavor is required. Very good. Apple has the color that is required. So apple, okay, so that's so far so good. Orange, you have a default location Florida, but nothing is required. So is this a correct XML that satisfies this type? The answer is yes, and I'll show you another one. Is this good or not? And you can see that apple is required to have colored, so this is not an XML document. This meets this type definition. Okay, so this is an example of DDT. So this says the element customer has name and address. This is an example of XML that do corresponds to that type. So type variable int x, except int x is heavy duty and also the int is heavy duty. This is the DDT for the book list example, the XML. And again, book list says is 0 or more books. The book has author, title, and published. So here is book, author, title, and published. And author has first name and last name. And you can see some attributes that are specified. So you can have a preprocessor that looks at an XML document to see if it satisfies this type. In the DDT, these are the elements. Elements can have children. Again, they are satisfying the regular expression. So this is 1 or more, this is 0 or more, this is apple or oranges. So these are the rule for the regular expressions and how they are used in this DDT. So you separate the comma for the elements. Asterisk means 0 or more. Question mark means we don't have it. Oh yeah, we have it, an optional 0 or 1, and plus means 1 or more. So attributes are specified by using this attribute list. So you say this element has one attribute of this type and is required. So we just see that in the example, so we understand how we specify. This is the element orange, has an attribute location, is required, and you can even put a default value in there. Very good. So well-formed, is this XML well-formed? So basket is made out of 1 or more cherry, and cherry has a flavor and is required. This one is well-formed and valid. Flavor is good, and again, this is character data, so this is not correct because you have to have a string in there. There are many DDTs out there, for example, for math, for chemical markup language, and again, you can actually create your own if you wish. There are many sophisticated query languages, so select everything from XQuery and XPath. So XPath takes you in the structure, in the tree structure of an XML document, and find the subroot that you are interested in, and XQuery actually returns the data. Okay, very good. So let's look at the three-tier architecture. So the MVC, the data is the model. It will be your database/tables that you are created using the principles we learned so far. The application logic, the controller that contains the business logic, and the presentation or the view. So that's the MVC. In a web application, this is not a class, but is HTML, and we'll look at forms. Again, if you have one-tier architecture, so the client, application logic, and the database are in one place. It is usually a mainframe. Again, everything has advantages and disadvantages. One advantage is easy to maintain, administer. Disadvantage, they expect a GUI to access, so that's not two-tier architecture. So here is the client through the network. The application and the DBMS are in the same server. For example, you guys will access like the DBMS server. That's the two-tier architecture, client-server architecture. Thin clients. So in the past, clients were very simple. But nowadays, you actually have laptops that are maybe as powerful as many supercomputers of the past. So again, in a Then the client only does the view or the presentation and it presents the GUI. The server has the business logic, the controller, and the data management. In a thick client, you can actually put together with the view or presentation the business logic, the controller, since nowadays the laptops are very powerful. And then you have the database server. Usually it resides on another computer. The disadvantages of a thick client, each client has a copy of the business logic, so that's a disadvantage if you want to update. And also security issues. Having on the client side the business logic is not a good idea. The three-tier architecture is the good practice. So you have your client, the presentation layer, the view. Through the network, you access the application server, and also over the network, you access the database server or the DBMS. So in MVC, presentation, middle data, MVC, these are some technologies that are used. So for the client, usually it's a browser. And let's see how we decompose this in an MVC. So the presentation layer is the graphical interface or the interface, but again, it's in HTML. So we'll look at the forms and we'll look at how to format the different displays based on the size of your display. The middle tier is the business logic, your functionality. And the data management tier is where your database / tables will be stored. So let's look at an airline reservation that is using the MVC. So what you put in the model in the database server, it will be your tables like airline information, seat information, customer information. In the application server or controller, you have make reservation, cancel reservation, add new airline. So this is the functionality of your web-based application. And in the view, you have actually the display in HTML. I call them input forms, and I'll show you the HTML tag form. And again, the user enters some information. Then when they submit, that is sent to the application server through the web server, and then that retrieves the data from the database, and then it comes back to application server. Web server will format and create what's known as output report, which is again HTML or XML. Let's take another application, course enrollment, and again, if you create this application using the MVC, the model in the database server will contain information about your table, student, course, instructor, course prerequisite. The application server is the verbs, what you can do. You can add a course, drop a course, create a course. The client, the view is the presentation layer. And again, you'll have input forms and output reports in HTML, and we'll look at some of these technologies. So technologies using the client, HTML, we looked at it. We looked at XML, and I'm going to show you JavaScript and how to format HTML using cascading style sheets, and how to format the XML using XL, so the type for XML. The application server examples of web servers are Tomcat, Apache, IIS for Microsoft, but also the pages that receive the information that you enter through the input form can be written in JSP, that stands for Java. So you have HTML, and behind it is, or inside it, you embed Java, or you embed C#, or you embed PHP. Database servers, again, they are relational, and also you can use, instead of a relation database, XML, or you can combine. And again, you can have stored procedures that run inside a DBMS, as we looked at in the previous language. These are the languages to communicate Java, SQL-J, and all the other examples. Why would I use a three-tier architecture? So again, you can maintain thin clients, just a presentation layer. In the application server, you can actually manage the connections to the database. And again, it's scalable, is centralized, so you don't have to change it in 100 places, just in one place. You can use well-defined APIs, reuse a lot of the code. So there are many advantages of using. Okay, I did promise that I will show you the HTML form and the input form output report, and we'll look at JavaScript, which is another tag in HTML, and it's embedded again in HTML. So these are the browser presentation layer, view, and the technologies described right here. So HTML form, and this will be the input form. We'll look at JavaScript and style sheets. Okay, so HTML form, the format. Okay, so here's the tag, begin and form. These are the attributes, action, method, and the name of the form. So I'm going to show you an exact example. So here's form. And in the form, I'm going to actually put the input tag. Here is the begin and end. The attributes are type, and you can have text, password. That means the text is not displayed. The submit, which is the submitting the form, and reset. Another attribute that you can have will be the name. So you can give this a name, and it can be accessed, for example, from JavaScript. And also you can have a value. That's another attribute, like in this example, and it's a login or clear. You can send this from the presentation layer from the form to the web server using the GET and POST protocol. And actually the contents of the form that you enter are part of the URI. So you can see in clear what the password is, which is not maybe such a good idea. So you can click on any page and you can say view source, and you will see the HTML and what you entered in the form. That's not very safe. We'll look at an actual example. Okay, so this is an example, begin and end form, and I have a table. That's a tag in HTML, so this is an entry. So if I actually take this example and read it in a browser, this is what you'll get. So the browser consumes this and is going to display this. Here is the login, user ID, and password. This form.html is in Blackboard if you want to try it. Now, JavaScript. Here is the begin and end tag of JavaScript. Is placed directly inside HTML document. The attributes are language. So again, JavaScript is a language on its own. The source where the script resides, and this is an example, begin and the language is JavaScript, source is in a file validate.js. Now, the JavaScript purpose is to add functionality in the browser, in the presentation layer. For example, a good use is to validate that you have entered a username password. I'll show you an exact example of JavaScript embedded in the form that we created. Okay, if your JavaScript is right here, this is the beginning and end, and this is going to create a pop-up, welcome to our store. So again, now we have HTML comments and we have JavaScript comments. So, again, HTML ignores JavaScript comments and vice versa. So we can actually comment both in JavaScript and HTML. JavaScript is a language, just like C or maybe Java. It has variables, assignment, comparison, relational, logical operators, statements, if, else, for loops, do while loops. It looks very familiar. Functions that return values, and again, it's like any function in any language, but this JavaScript is embedded inside HTML. So here is in the body of this HTML document, I'm going to place my form. And this is the script and script language JavaScript, and this is a function test login empty. It takes as a parameter the login form is going to access the user ID that I named this element and access the password, and is going to see if you enter something in there. So if you didn't enter something in there, this is the alert, a pop-up. Please enter value for user ID and password. So how do I invoke this from here? So here is the invocation. When I actually click on login, on click, this is the event, this test login empty, and this form that has user ID and password. So this will start executing every time you click on the login. This is an actual example. So if you actually use form of JavaScript HTML, this is what you get from the form. And if I click login without entering something in the username password, this is the pop-up I will get. The JavaScript, please enter values for user ID and password. So instead of sending the request and go all the way to the server, then get a response, hey, you didn't enter anything in the username password, you validate inside the browser before the request is sent to the web server. Style sheets. You have one for HTML, one for XML. Again, it's the same HTML content, but you want to display it differently. So we are looking at the HTML tags and how I can modify them. So again, we'll look at CSS, the style sheets for HTML documents, and then extensible style sheet language XSL for XML documents. So CSS cascading style sheets, you can control how HTML documents are displayed. For example, this refers to books.css, so you can reuse style sheets. And again, a CSS customarily has a selector, which is an HTML tag, and the property you want to modify. So as a concrete example, you can say the body, which is this HTML, I want the background color to be yellow. The H1, which is the HTML tag, font size 36, H3 color blue. Again, you can modify how the HTML stuff is displayed, but not the contents. Again, the first line also can be done by creating the attribute background color for the body. For XML documents, you have to style it XSL. And again, they are more sophisticated than CSS. You can also have XSLT that will actually take an XML document and convert it to another structure. So this is an example that I found. This is the DTD, the type. This is the XML document, like int X, which I mean, this type is very fancy, and this X is very fancy. And this is an example of XSL, how you format the XML document. And if you actually look at the output, this is what the actual rendering of that XML document that was modified will look like. So you have to understand the concept. XML documents, again, please note the fact that they are indented in a tree format, and you can actually have a tool that will create the pictorial approach. So you can say customer has 1, 2, 3, 4 children, and address has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 children, and so forth. So this is the visual representation of that XML document. Okay, very good. Let's look at the middle tier. Again, you have the web server is going to send the form and user enter data, and is going to pass it to the application server. And we'll look at several technologies used in the middle tier. Mainly Java page, C# page, Microsoft, and PHP. And we'll look at how we pass the information that the form took from the user. The middle tier functionality is the business logic. The controller also is going to connect you to the database system, so because you might want to get information from your database. So it accepts the form input, and now it has to actually create the generate the output for your response that goes back to the browser. So we'll look at some technology, some newer, some older. So again, this is the application that will receive, that's the action attributes in the form. Some are CGI. Again, the HTML form arguments are passed to a CGI application. Again, an application is going to create a new process every time you invoke it, and anyhow, they came up with the better ways like fast CGI, resource application pools, and so forth. So technology has changed, but this is an actual example of CGI. So here is your form in begin end. This is the CGI application code that will receive that. So it's part of the request. As part of the response, this you have to create HTML, right? So this is CGI. And I'm going to actually take the author name that I received from the input form and send it back. And this is the print. So this is how you generate the HTML. So this is HTML. I have an title, and you say the author is, and this is the author that actually was entered and received from the input form. This is the end of HTML. So this is how the response is going to be created using CGI code. Now the same thing is going to happen with other technologies in the middle tier. So again, these are the purposes of the application server. And we'll look at Java, we'll look at C#, we'll look at PHP. But again, from the application server to read things from the database, you use JDBC, Java first. ODBC, so again, many vendors provide drivers that allow access to the data source. And let's look at, this is Java. Servlets, again, you are to create the response. So again, you create, they have classes, servlet class and HTTP class that allows you to get a request and also populate the response. Okay, web server forwards the request to the servlet. Again, we did talk about this. Again, to create a process, a servlet, you use the init method and destroy. But again, you do it every request. So this is an example of servlets. So this is do get. and it takes two parameters. One is the request, the other one is the response. This method doGet throws a servlet exception or IO exception. So the get writer, and now remember doPost is going to invoke doGet, so this is the doGet. So let's look at how do I create HTML. So again, out is an object of print writer, so print line is going to actually write the response. So here is HTML, here is body, on order list item. So this is the HTML that's so this is Java first. And in Java, you create the HTML response. JSP, again, is Java. So the servlets is Java first. In the JSP is HTML first, and you embed Java inside the HTML. So let's look at an example of JSP. So again, I'm going to show you how to embed. So this is HTML, begin, end, body, and this is how I embed Java in it. So inside the HTML document, I execute, so less than and %. This is the end. So this is Java. Name is an object of class string. I initialize it. This is the request object that you get from the browser. You get a parameter username, and you are going to take that and put it in the Java name. And this is again HTML, but guess what? This is Java. So the name, which is declared in the Java part, is going to be put in there. So you take what's in the input form and you put it in the request. This is an actual example that I created to use JSP. So again, here is HTML, and here is the ODBC that connects you to the Oracle, and again you have the API. Again, this is a table, and this is how you actually get the result set data. So it's going to get three things from the database, and that's how you bind the dynamic data to the page. And when you display this, you are going to see the formatted, this is the what's produced. So these three tuples come from the database, and each one has three attributes. So you can retrieve them from the result set getString 1, 2, 3, and you can put that and format it in HTML like a table format. So that's pretty good. So this is the output produced by executing that. If you're interested, these are in Blackboard, and this is how you actually connect from the NetBeans JDBC to the Oracle DBMS. Now, Microsoft has ASP pages. They work exactly like a JSP page. So again, you'll have HTML, and inside the HTML, you are going to embed C#. Again, it works the same thing. So here is the request, and the web server invokes your page. You get the data from the database, and when you come back, the ASP page will bind the dynamic data to HTML. And after that, you send the response. The browser will display the page. Again, compared to other languages, it's equivalent to JSP, and we'll look next at PHP, but it's equivalent to any of these languages, so it does not matter. Okie doke. So this is an example of ASP code. It's using Visual Studio. And again, in Visual Studio, the advantage is that you have a design view. So you have a toolbox where you can actually drag all these controls or objects. This is a login control. You can actually name it anything you want. You can place it anywhere you want. So it's basically you build your GUI or user interface or graphical user interface, not by writing the code, which is in the source, but actually have a design view, and actually that will write the code for you. So Visual Studio IDE, just like the NetBeans or Eclipse IDE, So this is the page load, the code behind it, and actually this is C Sharp. C Sharp has all these classes. C Sharp and Java are identical. One is Oracle's, the other one is Microsoft. But anyhow, so here's how you create a connection to the SQL Server database. This is how you actually retrieve the dynamic data. This is actually how you go through the tuples that you return. And in this example, you are going to look in the database to see if the vHilford with that password is a valid username password. And if it is, you are going to say, welcome, you successfully logged in vHilford. So you have the HTML that embeds C Sharp. You get to the application server, it's going to look at the database server, come back with dynamic data, and verify that that's the user. So now, if you look at Microsoft, the default.aspx is the user interface that you can actually create using the toolbox. And the default.aspx.cs C# is the code, the C# programming that is embedded inside. So this is the C# code. So again, you are provided classes, you have methods, and all that stuff that is needed. So this is running the application. A SQL data source, actually you can connect to a data source from the GUI. So you can specify the IP address, the driver, and all that from the GUI. You don't have to write the code, but under the hood, the code is written for you. So this is the design view. And let's look at the source view where you find the source code. PHP is a scripting language. It's used for web developing and dynamic web pages. That means you get dynamic data from the database. So this is PHP. And this is HTML. So how do I embed PHP? This is the begin of PHP. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to create a class guestbook. This is the constructor. This is the add record, print record. And let's look at the rest of the class. And this is the end of the PHP. Here is more HTML. And I can embed, here's the form. I can embed PHP inside HTML. So this is the technology used. Now, maintaining state, HTTP stateless is easy to use, but if you want to have create a session, then that is not allowed. So you have to actually have that done in the code. So we'll look at application state. It can be on the server side or client side through the cookies. So we'll look at what the cookies are. But again, also you can hide it in the web page. But remember, if you right click and view source, you see it in clear. So maybe that's not a good idea. So there are advantages and disadvantages of storing the state in the server. Versus storing the state in the client. But I want to show you what cookies look like. So again, the cookie is going to be used to place that in the request for each HTML request. So instead of asking, you are actually looking at the cookies and put that in the request. Again, what cookies are a name and a value pair. It's in Java, and again, they are easy to use. And disadvantages, sometimes they are limited in size, sometimes are disabled by users. So when you have an application that relies on cookies, you have to let the user know. And okay, so this is Java class. My cookie, here's the new, here's the constructor, and I'm going to put Jeff B for username. And I'm going to add that to the response. I'm going to add the cookie. Now, if you want to look at the cookie and want to see if what you're looking for is in there, here's cookie is an array of cookie. And again, you can call the method getCookies. The string is the user. You go in a for loop for the cookies.length. This is Java 101. You get the cookie and then you get the name. You find username, the user, and then you get the value corresponding. So again, cookies give you a pair, um, and you can get that from cookies can have a duration, can have filters, and all that information. So there are many ways to have the state. Again, you can, but each HTML request will have the cookie attached. When you say hide data, again, if you view seeing the name and value in clear is not very good, and you can always have that. So I'll say maybe server side is better. So these are some more technologies where you can hide and you can maybe combine the methods where to store the state in the client, maybe in the server. So you have to look at your application and determine that. So what we have done, we looked at presentation layer or the view where you have the graphical user interface and it's in HTML. You can have a form, you can put JavaScript in it, you can format it. We look at HTTP and XML. You can have a type for XML documents. In the middle tier, we looked at CGI, we looked at servlets, we look at JSP, we look at ASP and PHP that are embedded inside the HTML. Middle tier not only does the business logic, but also connects to the database server, which is the topic of this course. I hope you enjoy it. Maybe it's a lot, but I guarantee you once you're working with this technology, if you understand it from the top-down view, you will be successful. Anyhow, these are the steps that I suggest. You watch the video, then play the PowerPoint in animated mode. There are some class participation activities. Apply them, then all this will be applied towards the homework. And of course, exam review and the exam, which don't look at them as test, is learning. Anyhow, enjoy it.